Hey guys, we're back. Today we're going to be diving into an element of the DBQ and LEQ, the thesis and contextualization element. You can tell I mean business today because I am wearing my blazer with the elbow patches. So yeah, I mean business. So at first we're going to look at the thesis, and then if we have time we'll look at contextualization. Alright, so let's look at what the CED says right off the bat. And you guys, I want to remind you too, if you haven't been looking at the CED regularly, go back, check it out, especially when it comes to content. That's going to be a really great place for you to go, like, hey, what do I need to know? What do I need to learn? So, thesis. Responds to the prompt with a historically defensible thesis claim that establishes a line of reasoning. To break it down, right? A, responds to the prompt. Okay, you got to answer the question. Historically defensible thesis. Historically defensible means it needs to be something that can be defended, so it's something that can be argued, right? There needs to be something that has another side to it. And then a line of reasoning, right, which is a because statement. And I'm going to break that down in a minute for you guys. The other thing we're going to look at is contextualization, which describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt, all right? And I'll talk about what that means when I'm done with thesis. But when you're actually writing your essay, while in the rubric and in this video, thesis is coming first, actually you're going to write your contextualization first, and then you'll come into your thesis. Your thesis will be the last part of your intro paragraph. So, intro, thesis claim. First thing you're going to do, read the question, and as you've probably seen other videos say, AP stands for answer the prompt. Make sure you actually answer the question, all right? Second, especially with the DBQ, you're going to read and group the documents, all right? So you're going to kind of go through the documents, figure out which ones fit well together, and you can group them all into one group. You can group them in two groups. You can group them into three groups. I'll talk about pros and cons of that a little bit later. Third, snag that contextualization point. Again, more on this later. When you start, you're going to write your contextualization first, right? That's going to be your first part of the paragraph, and then you're going to write your thesis. Okay, first, write that thesis, baby. The thesis should be 1 or 2 sentences. All right, you want to keep it specific and keep it concise. Be specific, be concise. All right. So within a thesis, you want to make 2 claims and have a line of reasoning, or because therefore sentence. All right, and then you're going to have claims. Thesis should contain a perspective, right? Something needs to have multiple sides. And so there is the John Irish method. Now there's a lot of different ways to write a thesis out there. I've looked up a bunch, and the John Irish method is the one I found to be the best in this class. I want you guys to follow this method, and I'll tell you why too. So the John Irish method is the although X, A and B, which are 2 specific points, therefore Y. So X being your best counter argument. What that does is it immediately says, hey, this has multiple sides, right? It contains perspective. It's defensible, right? The counter argument. A and B are specific evidence, right? It's your line of reasoning. So you say that we have A is true, B is true, and then you answer the prompt, right? Y is the prompt. And so the therefore Y is your answer to the prompt after your 2 lines of reasoning. The reason I like the therefore part, I mean, you could have because, you could be like, it meant, you could have a number of different words, but the reason I like therefore is because it actually forces you to answer the question. If whatever you're writing, and then you put a therefore in there, and it doesn't make any sense, then you're probably not answering the question, right? And so just having that therefore actually really will force you to be like intentional about how you're answering the prompt. And so, although X, A and B, therefore Y. Now, I'm going to talk real quick about A, B, and C here. So, theoretically, you could have a paper that just says X, although X, A, therefore Y. You could also have a paper that says although X, A, B, and C, therefore Y. And I'll talk about what that's going to look like in a couple minutes here. All right, so now let's look at an example of a thesis. So here's a DBQ prompt I found from the 2019 exam. Evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. Those of you guys who have completed Asian studies with me, we would have talked a little bit about this, right? When we're talking about the imperialism coming in to India and all of that during the 16th century. Another thing that you might want to do, just a good habit, is if you see 16th century, just go ahead and write 1500s right there on your test, right? Just so you don't accidentally get those dates mixed up in your head. You know, so I know it's easy to forget that. All right, so this right here is just a thesis. We don't have any contextualization with it. Although the arrival of the Portuguese was a very important change in Indian Ocean maritime trade in the 16th century, the Portuguese never extended their control beyond a few ports and had to compete with Indian merchants in regional states, such as the Ottoman Empire and the Sultanate of Aceh. I don't know how to pronounce that, sorry. Therefore, it did not completely transform trade. So, does this earn the point? Pause for a second. Tell me if this thesis would earn the point. All right. The correct answer is yes. This is a beautiful and perfect thesis, all right? So let's look at what it actually did. Now, the first thing you want to note, right, when we're looking at the prompt is evaluate the extent, okay? So this is big. There's a number of historical thinking skills that can fit into that, but that's really what you need to make sure you answer, that you're actually providing an evaluation of the extent, all right? And the extent of what? Of how it was transformed. So if we look down here, and let's look at how they did with the John Irish method. Although the arrival of Portuguese was very important, that's X, all right? So here we have the counter argument. It does talk about it being very important. It says, hey, you could argue that it was really important. The Portuguese never extended their control beyond a few ports. One area that they could have improved is they could have added such as, and they could have said, hey, these are the ports, maybe the Indian ports or even Macau, right? They could have added that and had to compete with Indian merchants in regional states such as the Ottoman Empire and the Sultanate. So B, they do have specifics though, right? They talk about Indian merchants, they talk about regional states, they talk about the Ottoman Empire. So they do get that point for being specific in there, right? And so we have A and B. Therefore, it did not completely transform trade. Now, when this person is going to go on and further write their essay, what you have is you have A and B. So they're going to have 6 documents that they pick from. They're going to take 3, and they're going to take 3 and apply it to A, right? The Portuguese never extended control beyond a few ports. So how do these documents actually support this thesis is what she's going to be looking at, or he or she's going to be looking at later on. Therefore, did not completely transform trade. And so within that, they're going to be arguing that it did not transform trade in this bunch. And then in the second bunch, right, they're going to look at B, the Indian merchants, the regional states, the Ottoman Empire. How did those not completely transform trade? And so those are the 2 things that they're going to be addressing in their essay overall. And this is where A, B, and C matter, right? In a DBQ, if you have 6 documents, right, you could bunch all of them into one bunch and say, hey, all of these, they're just going to be one big collection. And I'm going to have 1 point I make for that. They're all going to fit in there. The other option is you separate them into groups of 3 and 4, right? And then you have your A and B. Another way, and I've seen this done a couple of times, is they actually would say do A, B, and C and have 3 different points that you're actually going to be addressing in your thesis, and then have 2 documents that address it, 2 documents, and 2 documents. And then you can break it down that way. As far as, you've got a limited amount of time what you're going to write, but you still want to get that complexity point. I would really encourage you to use the A and B method, right, instead of ABC or just A. Still along those lines, though, when we talk about complexity, this also sets you up for complexity, right? The fact that you've already got the adverse side of it, and when I talk more about the rest of the essay, you'll see that more of like being able to actually have the adverse side, having both sides of it, will set you up for it in the long run. So really, the way this thesis is set up, it's really going to set this person up for success. All right, let's look at another one here. All right, evaluate the extent to which the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. Same prompt, contextualization, and thesis. All right, pause real quick, and tell me if it answers the point, or write down if you think it answers the point. All right, welcome back. Does it answer the point? No, it does not. All right, let's look. During 16th century, Portuguese started trading people throughout the Indian Ocean. Quickly, they were able to transform trade almost completely. However, some people view this as a negative thing, as the Portuguese overstayed their welcome. The people of the Indian Ocean believed that Portugal's intent was not to trade, which created conflict with them. So although it does restate the prompt with an assertion that the Portuguese transformed trade almost completely, the line of reasoning in it, right, the reasoning they're giving in the remainder of it focuses on opinions about the Portuguese rather than the actual trade transformation, right? So they're really looking at just the opinions. They're not looking at how the trade transformed. And this is their entire intro. So, did they get the contextualization point? No, they don't get that either because there is none. They made no attempt at contextualization. All right, one more prompt here we're going to look at. We have the LBQ, or the DBQ and LEQ. So this one is an LEQ example. Evaluate the extent to which ideas of self-government influenced American colonial reaction to British imperial authority in the period 1754 to 1776. The red is the thesis, so that's what we're going to look at right now. So, although some people saw no problem with the new taxation, X, the ideas of self-government majorly influenced colonial reaction to British imperial authority from 1754 to 1776, A, because they were not used to it, they thought they did not have enough say in British Parliament. Why? So, evaluate the extent to which ideas of the government influenced American colonial reaction to British imperial authority. They weren't used to it, so they did not think they had enough. So right here is the evaluation of the extent. they did not think they had enough say, right? So we do have it. This thesis does earn the point. Now, based on this opening paragraph alone, right, you read through it, we'll pause a second, read through it. What do you think they scored overall on their essay and why? If they lost any points, where did they lose that point? Granted, you're not seeing the rest of the essay, but just take a guess now. Pause now. All right. This essay scored a 5 out of 6. They lost 1 point because of complexity. And you could guess it from this because they only had the A, right? They did not set themselves up for deeper, more complex writing later on. So off the bat, they actually hurt themselves and they cost themselves that point. The other thing we talked about in class before is the idea that graders are human, right? And if many teachers teach this, the John Irish method, using it will make it very easy for them to spot what you're trying to say. And so it'll make it easier for them to grade, which will make it more likely they'll give you that point. So really you want to be as clear and concise and not make the reader have to guess what you're trying to say as you're going through this. Now here is the contextualization, and I'm going to go over that in part 2. All right, guys, you can tell this is part 2 because I've changed out of a blazer into a cardigan. That's right. So we're toning it down a little bit. This one's not going to be quite as serious, but we are going to look at contextualization right now. So contextualization is the first thing you're going to write in your essay. And it's the second point on the rubric, and it describes a broader historical context relevant to the prompt. So broader historical context, all right, those are important, and then also relevant to the prompt is important as well. So let's talk about it a little bit. Essentially, what contextualization is setting the stage, right? And so I've heard a couple of good examples. One example is the Star Wars scroll, right? If you guys remember the Star Wars movies, at the very beginning, there's kind of like a scroll that comes up, and it's telling you everything that's happened just before the movie starts. Another good example I heard was the previously on, right? When you watch a TV show, and at the very beginning, there's a previously on CSI, or whatever the show is, right? It tells you exactly what happened on the earlier episode to catch somebody up. Another good example I heard was if you're inviting a friend to watch a TV show with you, and they're about to step into the second episode of this great TV show, right? You would then say, oh, in the first episode, this is what happened. And so all of those are great examples of how contextualization is, or what contextualization is. So what was happening just before or in the immediate past. And this is important because you're going to be tempted to have things in the way, way past. But it's not that, it's in the immediate past, right? So if you are in a push and you're doing an LEQ from period 3, stick to period 2 of your contextualization. Don't be talking about the early natives and the Aztecs and all of that. That's going to be way too early, right? So make sure you're sticking to something in the immediate past. You got in AP World, you got a little bit more time to work with. You know, there's a broader time span, but still needs to be pretty close to what's happening to setting the stage. The other thing is you need to be specific. And obviously I say this all the time. You need to be specific. Don't be vague with it, right? Get some very clear, specific points. I'm going to show you an example of what that looks like. And then 3 to 4 sentences in the intro before your thesis. So it's the very first part, 3 to 4 sentences, not just 1 sentence. And so that also means that you're going to be identifying 3 to 4 specific examples in that, right? And so it should be more than 1 sentence, right? It shouldn't be just, here it is. And then the last point, and really important, is that it is related to the prompt. And so after talking to a reader from the 22 or 2020 AP exam, those who didn't earn contextualization in 2020, and this is what he said, most common reason was skipping it altogether. A lot of people just forgot to do it, right? So that's why it's an easy point right there at the beginning, setting the stage for your whole essay, leading into your thesis statement. Second, it was too vague. They didn't provide specific examples. You know, it was like, hey, you know, history was crazy at this time, man. Like, I don't know, it was crazy. Like, that was your contextualization? No, you got to be specific. Why was it crazy at that time? What crazy thing was happening? Third was not showing how the context was relevant, right? Meaning it was not tied to the prompt, right? And so, I mean, I could talk all day about how crazy history was. You know, maybe I have a prompt on 2020, and I'm talking all day about craziness of 2020. But if it doesn't actually tie to the question, I do not get the point for it. And so let's look at that. I have one example here we're going to look at today. We've already looked at this example in the thesis, but now let's come back to it. So, our LEQ prompt. Evaluate the extent to which ideas of self-government influenced American colonial reaction to British imperial authority, period from 1754 to 1776. Now, when you're looking at this prompt, right, we've talked about before, evaluate the extent. You need to make sure you're looking at what it's asking for, but also the period, right? We want to be mindful of what period it is. Okay, so here's our opening paragraph. We know it has contextualization. We know it has a thesis in it. Pause, read it, and decide, does it actually get the contextualization point? Pause now. All right, so does it get the point? Yes, it does get the point. Let's look at it. So, evaluate the extent to which the ideas of self-government influenced American colonial reaction. So during the period of 1754 to 1776, the United States colonists had a history of self-government, right? Star, it's there. Do they earn the contextualization as far as addressing the prompt with just saying that? Not really, but they are putting it in there, so they are at least being clear, and then they are going to follow it up here. So self-government and self-taxation. They had town meetings, so bam, now we've got something specific in relation, and representative democracy, specific, but even more specific is Virginia House of Burgesses, right? The fact that they're able to have something very specific to represent the democracy, bam. We've got multiple examples. Okay, let's see, 1, 2, 3 examples here of what we're actually looking at related to the topic, right? It all comes back to the topic. Now, I want to look at the second sentence for a second. However, the British wanted more taxation and money from the colonists after fighting a costly war with the French. All right, so what this is referring to is the French and Indian War, right? It's addressing that. Now, one thing is, it's not specific, right? Just a war with the French. What war with the French? They should have been more specific with it. But another thing that messes with them is the fact that it's from 1754 to 1776. We're not before the prompt, right? We're not leading up to it. So this was during it. So they actually, and in the notes from College Board, they actually did not get credit for contextualization for this part. But since they had this stuff up here, they got the point. But this, they could have left out altogether. It wouldn't have mattered, right? So you see it's because of the date and because of lack of specificity, right? I never get that word right. But make sure that you are, falling in within the date, right? You're doing the right date, you're being specific. And then we also, as we've already talked about this thesis, we know it's a great thesis, all right? Or an acceptable thesis. All right, so we got a good example of contextualization, but here are some other possible responses that the College Board provided. The Mayflower Compact, an example of self-government. Enlightenment ideas, right? And so we see that as a good example. Colonial experiences with local control of religious institutions. The examples were the Congregationalist Church, right? The fact that you have these churches that are actually governing as well, that's another example of self-government ideas. And then salutary neglect and limited enforcement of navigation acts, right? All of that showing that the British weren't really governing, that the colonialists and the Americans were governing themselves previously to that time period. All of those things would have been good examples of contextualization. Now, later on in your essay, you're going to be trying to earn that outside evidence points, right? When you do that, you cannot use things found in your contextualization. So make sure that you're being mindful. Don't chalk it so full of everything. Say one of these points for your outside evidence point later on if you need to. All right, so be mindful of that. You can't double down. All right, so I hope this helped you guys. I hope you're ready to write your thesis and contextualization statements for your DBQs and LEQs.